Hello everybody and welcome to CRF's latest webinar on the topic of developing adaptive leadership for times of crisis and beyond. I'm Gillian, Pillans, Research Director from CRF. Now I'm sure you're all really familiar now with how this Zoom stuff works, but just as a brief reminder, we will be recording the session today, and the recording will be available afterwards along with a summary of the discussions on the call. We'd love to hear your questions, your perspectives, so please use the chat or you can put your hand up, or if you'd like to submit your question in person, then you can unmute yourself. We'll be keeping everyone muted throughout the call to avoid too much background noise. We will be we'll be hearing a couple of presentations, but we'll also be taking some time during this call to in breakout rooms to give you the opportunity to share among yourselves what's going on in your organizations. So for those of you who are familiar with the research we've done over the last few years at CRF, you will know that the theme of disruption is a topic that we come back to regularly, looking at the implications for organizations, for leaders and for HR around business disruption, largely focused on digital disruption. But what we're finding is that we're facing a different kind of disruption at the moment. Last year we published a major piece of research looking at leadership in times of disruption, and particularly looking at leadership in the digital age. And as part of that research, we looked at a particular model of agile leadership that was developed by metaBeratung and in collaboration with IMD Business School. And so we're going to be touching on that model today, looking at what that means, and also specifically how we can apply that to the current situation that we're all in. So our speakers today, we've got Nicole Neubauer, who's the CEO of metaBeratung, and then we're going to hear from application of some of the ideas in practice from Kerechashvili, and I hope I got your name right there, from JTI. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Nicole. Thank you.
Thank you and welcome everyone. I'm looking forward to spending this lunch hour with you. I'm just starting to share my screen. So my name is Nicole Neubauer. I'm running metaBeratung, which is a management consultancy operating in the German-speaking region, but quite internationally with clients. I needed to develop my adaptive leadership style in times of COVID quite a bit, and I'm looking forward to sharing some thoughts around this. How the agile leadership model can help here, I would like to share with you within the next 10 to 15 minutes. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the model, I'm going to introduce you and also share some light in what kind of competencies and behaviors we have seen that have helped you navigate through COVID times when your teams were left in the home offices and you needed to seize the opportunity and business was changing. So origins and purpose of the model. It was really going back 4 years ago. We are working with leaders and organizations and helping them stepping up into their leadership role based on personality. We are working with the Hogan personality assessments to give individuals strategic self-awareness and learn about their strengths and weaknesses. And it was the time where organizations were hit quite badly from digitizations, having to either renew, replace, or complement their current business models. And that was the time when we thought there needed to be another approach towards leadership, and leaders turned to us and saying, what is the right leadership style that is being expected? That was the time when we turned to IMD management, IMD Business School in Lausanne, and worked together in a study redefining leadership in a digital age, because we wanted to know what really makes an agile leader and what kind of competencies and behaviors would describe. We started by the end of 2016 sent out the questionnaire beginning of 2017 and had over 1,000 executives from all over the world answer. 17 industries were represented, and we developed the questions jointly with the IMD team around Professor Mike Wade in structured interviews. And the result of that is the following model. We were able, based on the findings, to describe what an agile leader looks like. So on the outside ring, you have 4 competencies, starting with humility, then going to adaptability, visionary, and engaged. And in the internal ring, you have 3 behaviors that matter in leaders, taking you through digitization, being charged with finding new business models. So humility came as a surprise, I have to say. We were surprised to see that people expected from a leader these days that it's rather, leading is rather more about listening than leading, and accepting the fact that others know more than you, asking for questions, asking for other opinions, and let the decision being taken with a team member who might have more knowledge than you have in one specific area. Adaptability is the second competency that came out as part of the research. So what do we mean by adaptability? It's accepting the fact that change is constant, and changing direction based on new information is not losing your face in front of your team, but it's rather adapting to the fast-paced environment that we have. Then on the lower end, we have visionary, and still it's expected from leaders to have a clear sense of long-term direction. And long-term direction, we mean 2 to 3 years by that. But be also flexible enough to have minor changes along the way, to be ready to take up new information as well. Engagement describes a leader today being more a coach than a leader, is listening before you speak, engaging with others, and interacting with your team much more. So if we turn to the inside ring, we see 3 behaviors. It's hyper-aware, making informed decisions, and executing at speed. And I would like to explain a little bit, what do we mean by hyper-aware? Hyper-aware is really being aware of the complexity you're finding yourself in, and being, I always call it the truffle pick, finding the little bits and pieces and the opportunities around you, coming from another industry, for example. Hyper-aware, classic example is Daimler, for example, the car manufacturer, is working with the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany on weather data. So the Fraunhofer Institute collects weather data, sends these weather data to the farmers, and they have a cooperation going with Daimler to get the weather data from the windscreen wipers, to have even more exact weather data from those cars driving in rain. So they're taking this up. This would be a perfect example for hyper-awareness, where you take information out from another industry and use it for your purposes to make your information more specific. While you're seeing trends around you with this hyper-awareness part, you also need to make informed decisions. So you need to have business simulations in place to really, for your organization, understand whether or not this trend that you're seeing outside will have an impact on your organization too. And then the executing at speed part is really being able to execute swiftly, and being also ready to make mistakes. It's not about the mistake making, but it's, I think, the process, and we have a number of agile methods that help you here along the way, that you can use, is learning along the way and getting a product out there. So basically, this is the model that we came up with based on the research we did with IMD. And obviously, we're working in the personality business, so we wanted to know How do we measure it in a leader? And leaders wanted to know from us, how can we develop to become an agile leader in order to live up to today's challenges? And this is where we worked together with Hogan Assessments and did a mapping from the classic 28 Hogan scales, for those of you familiar with that, onto these competencies and are able to measure it based on a personality assessment. So really understanding, seeing behavior, what drives behaviors underneath the surfaces is driven by competencies, personality, and motives. And that is the so-called setting that we have set up. And we have a number of organizations who are now working with this model. Like Anna will share later how she's using the Agile Leader Assessment and the model within her team. We are working in different areas and applying the model. I'm sharing here with you different results. First of all, we are working on an individual level with leaders who would like to know how can I become towards developing towards agile leadership, and what is the sense where my organization is heading. We have a number of organizations we work with who are using the agile leader model at individual level, but in talent management, but also in succession planning. So talent management would mean having an assessment done and having the individual understand where they stand in terms of their agile leader competencies and which behaviors they need to develop. This we do by coaching and offering learning nuggets along the years. So for example, how do you make yourself visible in the organization? How do you engage with your team? How can you learn to move faster? How can you learn to see trends happening around you? How can you build a network? How to fail? How do you use agile methods like Scrum, for example, in order to get rapid prototyping in place for your team? This is the type of work that we apply the model with. With regards to succession planning, it's very often helping organizations understand which competencies or leaders they have in place and who can step up into a more agile role, who can take over. Boards and companies very often turn to us as they have realized that they need to change and would like to understand how they can change and use the model as an orientation. With regards to team level, we do aggregated results like the one that you can see here. So it's with regards to the team learning about blind spots and competencies and behaviors that might be strong and might be missing. This team varies along the way. If we take a look at humility, between the 30th and the nearly 70th percentile. The dot in the middle is the mean that we've built across all the results. And it helps the team understand who is a humble leader and who might have some learnings to learn along the way, to be listening more to the team, to be active more with the teams. We have worked so far with very traditional organizations who have used the aggregated results. For them, very often it was an eye-opener to see, for example, that they were very low scoring on hyper-awareness, so not seeing trends around them. And being in a very traditional business, the caveat was to understand that they needed to have someone in the team seeing trends in order to help them survive going forward. So going through COVID times and going back to the model, there are a few behaviors that stick out with regards to surviving in terms of crisis and how to become more agile. So let me go back to the model. What we've seen and what has helped organizations to concentrate on during COVID was first of all, adaptability. So seizing the opportunity, seeing trends, well, making new decisions as new information came up. I don't know how this was for many of you. In Germany, we had this March 13th, where we went into shutdown basically, and were moved back to the home offices. And us as a team, for example, we immediately went to offering our workshops and certification workshops in a virtual format. So we put all the efforts in week 1 being in the home office and in shutdown onto offering our services not in a personal but in a virtual format, and we were able to secure our business. So we were adaptable, but what also helped is the behavior executing at speed. This is where we were very fast in seeing that we were no longer able to meet in person, and the outlook wasn't clear in when the shutdown would stop. So this was also a behavior that was very important to us, and a major differentiator that helped driving through COVID. The next one was engagement. With people moving into the home office, it was the role of the leader basically putting the team together, and also thinking about new ways of meeting. I remember some traditional German companies really had a lot of difficulties putting their people in the home offices, as they weren't geared up for that. They had to make all the preparations, and that took them 2 weeks' time to have all the people in the home office. And for the leaders, it was the challenge to reach out to their teams, still work on tasks and work on the regular business with them. So here, reaching out, using obviously virtual meeting methods. We've seen virtual lunch breaks, virtual meetings along the way to keep the engagement up. These are the kind of 3 competencies and behaviors that we are seeing in the model that have helped us along the way navigating through this crisis time. So I know that I was asked to be very short on time. Are there any questions with regards to the model? And I know, Gillian, you had some pressing questions as well.
Yeah, so thanks, Nicole. If you have any questions for Nicole, then please do use the chat, or feel free to unmute and ask your question. I have one to get us started, Nicole, which you said the concept of humility has been a little bit controversial.
Yes.
So, be curious to understand what's the pushback that you're getting on that? Why do you see that, and how are you kind of resolving that pushback?
Yes, as I said, humility came as a surprise. So really taking a step back as a leader and letting others speak first, listening to others and their ideas. The questions around humility is always, how do you see humble leaders in the organization who are very strong in the social aspects of, let's say, putting a team together and getting engagement fueled in the team? Obviously, the assessment built behind this model helps. Having others speak up about more humble leaders, you see that in engagement scores as well. But you will need to have an assessment done to be really able to detect someone who's a humble leader. The way we selected in leaders in the past has been on certain, let's say, challenging behaviors, because we always say we need to see a leader in the organization in order to select him or her. And there's a big difference also between men and women with regards to gender, not from a personality aspect, but also looking at the behavioral aspect. There seems to be a difference in how women are being brought up and men are being brought up, because if we are looking at 360 results, we see that women score lower on humility than men do because of their self-ratings. So coming back to your question, humility is something it's a challenge because we haven't selected leaders in the past based on their humble scores. We have selected them in because they were colorful, because they were bold. And this is what sometimes scores them lower on humility. And this is the learning aspect that we are trying to help people with. But they need to understand that leadership today means taking a step back and listening to others rather than being Mr. or Mrs. Know-it-all.
I think that's very consistent with our research, and some of the leadership research that we've tapped into shows that there's a difference between what the characteristics of people who are selected into leadership positions versus those who are effective in leadership positions. So, yes. and I think that sort of chimes with what you're saying. Being bold is more likely to get you noticed, but doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be an effective leader in the long term. We've got quite a few questions coming in about interest. I think a lot of the organisations who are on the call are using the Hogan series of measures. So just some questions in terms of how your work fits with the Hogan assessments and Hogan profiles, and are there any particular Hogan profiles specifically that align with particular aspects of the HAVE model?
Yes. So what we did after the research that we did with IND, we worked with Hogan assessments and did a validation study. So what you do there is you run another survey and try to see what kind of Hogan scales you need in order to predict humility. And the outcome is that based on the classic Hogan assessments, you can actually come up with the Agile Leader assessment and come up with the Agile Leader report. So we are able to measure, based on the classic 3 Hogan assessments, these Agile competencies. This is how you go about that. We have even last year developed a 360 tool, which is also taking this competency model into account, and we have a number of organizations like Anna from JTI who are working with this model and using the assessment. Some parts of the organization, like I said before, would like to use it for their leadership in order to get them familiar with a different leadership style. Some organizations have only taken up the 3 behaviors in the middle and then have adapted to a competency model they had in place anyway. So there can be different ways of working with it, but the assessment will allow you like a standard personality assessment based on these competencies as a measure for the individual, and then we are taking in the results also for group level assessments.
Okay, thanks Nicole. So I'd like to hand over to Anna Kay now, just to bring the ideas to life. So Anna's going to share a case study of how this approach has helped you make sense of what is a business in going through a great degree of transformation, moving to agile form of management, and how this is helping you make sense of that. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anna Kerechashvili, and I'm the People and Culture Agile Partner at JTI. In the next 15 minutes, I'm going to share the challenges that we have been through on our journey towards being an Agile team, and also the learnings we derived from the Agile leadership model with the help of metaBeratung. Before we go into the topic of the Agile leadership, I would like to give you a bit of a background on who we are. And we're a global company with 130 countries covered by our 400 offices with 45,000 employees spread around the world. And while we're a relatively young company of 21 years old, we have a big heritage. And for us to continue working successfully at some point of time, we realized that the transformation is needed. So 2 years ago, we have announced company-wide transformation in our attempt to be VUCA proven, so that we continue being successful in the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. And one of the key pillars in this transformation for us was building organizational agility, which is closely linked and is basically constructed on the Agile Manifesto, which is usually used in IT sphere. Yet now most of the companies are turning into, are interested in also introducing the Agile ways of working in their companies as well, in the attempt to stay highly effective and being able to compete with all of the disruptive, innovative startups coming from everywhere, with very little resources required to become successful and gain some share of market from those industry leaders. I have just put two buzzwords together, the transformation and agility. And before I continue, I would like to explain what it means for us as a company. And I will use the quote which I read in McKinsey, one of the McKinsey articles. And one of the CEOs is saying, imagine we're a big cruise ship having 3,000 passengers on it. And instead of having all 3,000 passengers on one cruise ship, we need these people spread around few hundred very quick boats. So for JTI, who is a big, huge, from what you see, we are a big cruise ship. And what we need is, in a long-term perspective, in 4 to 5 years, we would like to make sure that we are all on board of a very quick, maneuverable boats, which are ideally moving in the same direction. And for us to achieve this aim, we had to look at the changes which were required in our people and culture processes, because we needed to understand what kind of people should we be looking for, what kind of behaviors and competencies we need from the people in those agile teams. How do we lead those teams, because they follow different principles from our traditional silo or functional based teams. And having all these questions in mind, we tried to structure our challenges, and we were starting with a very small scope. 7 months ago, we have set up the team, which consisted of 9 people only at a global level in our HQ based in Geneva. So this is a small cell of 9 people in a wider corporate people and culture function. And our mandate is to basically spread the agility across people and culture level, first at the corporate level, and then later on cascaded down to locations based on the learnings we get now. Within first 4 months, we have faced a number of challenges, which I have tried to boil down to 3 main ones. And the number one was, what should we as Agile team be equipped with? And while we had a number of tools in our tools for our internal selection process, where we usually rely on the global flagship behaviors of the company, we look at the potential attributes where the internal candidates display those indicators that we want them to have. But we were still afraid that we would miss something that is extremely relevant and needed in this VUCA world, so that people can be flexible, adaptable in crisis situation, being able to react quickly, execute at speed, etc. The second challenge for us was, how do we make this team work successfully together? And I need to make a bit of intro here, that the principles that Agile teams are built on are slightly different of what we are used to. So usually the agile teams, both in IT industries and now beyond IT industries, are flat. So everyone is reporting into the same agile lead, and there are simply different levels of expertise, but the reporting line is pretty much, it's very flat. There are no really leadership roles, but there is a rotational role of so-called product owner and scrum master who are responsible for either handling stakeholders, that's product owner, or the scrum master who is the guardian of the team's productivity. And then the agile teams are the ones who are self-organizing. So you don't really, so it's a notion of a shared leadership. I don't expect anyone to tell me how to do or when to do the things, but I'm pulling tasks for myself. And it's also not individualistic leadership. It's not self-leadership. I also have to think about the bigger team objective. So for us in JTI, it was a very different idea, that very different concept of leadership we're used to when we're looking for the charismatic people who can be in charge, who can tell the people how to deliver the project, when to do it, etc. Now we face something completely different, and we were not sure about how to use it. And then the agile theory says, or like I would say prescribes, for the newly set up agile teams to be co-located. They say that you become self-organizing only by sitting all together, being able to collaborate instantly, etc. And well, we spent 3.5 months working together in our lovely agile space, and now we've spent almost like 3 months, soon 3.5 months, working remotely. So that was another hit that we got as a team in our pursuit of becoming highly effective team. To me, coronavirus or COVID-19 is simply a metaphor. We are talking about any crisis event, any black swan event which can happen in our VUCA world. So how do we flourish in crisis situation? What is it that we're looking for in people to make sure that they feel comfortable in readjusting, reshuffling their responsibilities in the crisis? And I will quickly go through how we try to tackle the challenges using the agile leadership model. And what we did is that when we were running the internal recruitment process, we specifically focused on the elements of engagement, someone who had vision, and also being able to execute at speed. Because the agile team was the first in the people and culture function, we needed someone who would be able to see how we can evolve. We wanted someone who would be highly committed to it, and also being able to move fast, because we needed to show the results on a very regular basis in a very short time. We also decided to have a team workshop to understand the composition of the team. So how we all knew our individual scores, but how does it come all together in the team composition, and use it as an onboarding event, and then using the outputs of this workshop to perform. And what we did in terms of actions, we first start with individual reflections, looking at my results. I was thinking of contributing to this shared leadership, shared productivity. So what I'm good at, what I can bring to others, and what I need in terms of support from others. We also looked at the detailed analysis of the team results, similar to what Nicole was sharing in terms of her experience with other clients. So we knew exactly what are our strengths as a team. And then we were also aware of our watch-outs. And then we did a very practical exercise of actually thinking of how we can tackle the caveats and how we can actually leverage the strengths. And the next slide is probably the core the core of the presentation. It's the practicalities of how we integrated the learnings into our daily life. And what you will see in terms of actions has been implemented very shortly before the COVID lockdown came into. So all of the activities has been proven to be virtual, like they were virtually proof. So we transferred them from the physical, tangible space in our office to MS Teams space. And I will first I will share the insights and the actions we took to take into consideration. So based on the analysis, based on the workshop, our team has proven to have relatively high score in adaptability, with high flexibility, readiness for change, Yet it was rather consistent across the team, but we had some people who needed more predictability. And then we said, okay, we want to accommodate everyone. We want to make sure everyone makes comfortable in this environment. So what we agreed to have is the alignment days. So before the beginning of each project, we have a session when we define the scope of the project, and we try to to address whatever concerns there are existing, if people feel like we are changing too much the direction. We also have introduced the notion of North Star, our team OKR, something kind of talking how our ideal year should look like, how our ideal results should look like. And then whenever there is a change in our direction, we're always linking, like we're trying to establish the link and seeing that this change is required for us to achieve our longer term goal. And we also do the weekly retrospectives. We meet virtually every Wednesday to reflect on learnings or project updates. And if there is anything that is still requiring clarification, we do it all together. In terms of engagement, we have a very high score of engagement, yet there were differences in the social interactions. So we have 75 or maybe 60% of the team who are highly extroverted, motivated by communication, and other people who prefer direct communication. They're rather introvert and less interested in broader networks. So we needed to establish the right balance in frequency and extent of those communications. So we said we're going to have weekly mandatory team calls where everyone has to attend to stay tuned. And then we have daily informal volunteer virtual coffee updates, much shorter, whoever wants to join from their work, from their walk with kids, or their garden, whatever they're doing. And then the rest of the interactions are split between the streams on particular projects. We had a very interesting score in humility. Apparently, we were not as humble as the benchmark. So we're a bunch of people with very strong ideas, believing in our individual abilities and the rightness of the ideas. So this was probably the most big watch outs for us to take into account. And it didn't mean that we wouldn't hear each other. It's more around how much we're stubborn protecting our ideas. And we have the rotational roles, the leading roles, more or less, like the roles who have power within the project. So we always rotate the roles of the product owners responsible for the stakeholders and the scrum master working with the teams. And then also when I kind of trying to shuffle, like rotate people within the teams, making sure that everyone has an opportunity to participate, to express opinion, and to be in charge of particular tasks. We also worked out the agile performance management. We developed a new pilot agile performance management system, which is very different from our standard continuous discussion kind of performance appraisal system, where you are constantly evaluated by your peers, stakeholders, customers, at least once in 3 months, but also on a more regular basis. And we do believe that this is also will contribute to the self-awareness increase and establish the new culture of constructive feedback between not so humble people. And then hyper-awareness, we are all very interested and curious in learning new things. And for us to share the expertise, and we also all come from different backgrounds, we established the weekly learning nuggets, where we, again, not mandatory, voluntary basis for sharing whatever books we have read, whatever projects we are participating, or things we do outside of work, which can contribute to each other's hyper-awareness as well. We also invite people from other agile teams to see what's their best practices. And we also established, we work with Kanban boards. So we use Trello for seeing all of the tasks and their status in each project. And we introduced learning opportunity notification. So when I'm responsible for a task where I'm, let's say I'm at a mastery level, I know how to execute perfectly, and I know there is a team member who is actually at the learning expertise level, I indicate this task as a learning opportunity, and whoever wants can join me, job shadow, kind of I would explain this, how to execute the tasks, etc. So with the insights that we have got from Hogan Agile leadership model, we managed to establish daily practices in the Agile team, which allowed us to probably share the leadership. And looking at the results of the past 3 months, we have all of the projects running in a timely manner. We have recently delivered the first Agile product for roughly 150 Agile employees of pilot Agile teams. And I would say that this model has contributed a lot to how we managed to, I would say, flourish in the before and after COVID-19 crisis. And with that, I would like to hand over back to Gillian.
Okay, Anna, thank you very much. That was really, really nice to have the that brought to life, and some really practical stories about how you've dealt with some of the challenges you have, particularly around virtual working. There's quite a lot of the questions that have been coming up have been around this idea of virtual leadership, and it's interesting. You highlighted what we hear a lot about organizations that go to more agile management techniques is it can be really difficult to do that in a virtual way, and I wonder whether there's a bit of a tension between shared leadership and virtual working, whether it makes it harder to have that model of shared leadership. So I don't know what you think about that. Is that a tension that you face? And any sort of practical tips around what you've discovered works in sort of resolving that tension?
It's a very good question. I'm happy that I can answer it, also based on the very recent experience. So as soon as we went into the COVID-19 crisis, we have established sort of a task force on fostering new ways of working. And one of the major concerns that people bring up while being like virtually working virtually is that their visibility is decreasing. So if before we were all sat in the same space and you had sort of direct access to your agile lead, now you like kind of it's not really virtual silos, but there is less visibility, and it's concern that goes beyond agile teams, and it went viral within the whole organization. So what we said is that it's more of a strategic action now. We need to tackle it at the company level. And what we are going to do is that we're going to showcase the examples of people who have been successful while working from home. So people completing successful projects, getting promoted. So it's important to also change the mindset that now you can't be a leader while sharing it with the rest of the team, and also while being like working from home. So it's a lot of change of mindset work for us in the company, and we are in the very beginning of this journey.
Thanks, Anna. Sorry, I've apparently I was in darkness, so I hope you can see me now. Just before we go into groups to do a more intimate discussion, there's a lot of questions coming up around the potential conflict, again talking about paradoxes between humility and expertise, and how we resolve that one. So I don't know, Nicole, maybe you can jump in here, and certainly from the messages that are coming through on the chat, that sounds like that is a tension that organizations are perhaps struggling with in thinking about this.
Mm-hmm. So being an expert in something is, well, basically bringing your knowledge to life, but also taking into consideration that you have more people in your team who you should listen to. So what is a competency? That comes back to the description of what is the competency is observed behavior that we observe. So when you're low on humility, it's a little bit coming back to the comment that Anna made in her presentation, is having a strong sense of what you want and being stubborn on pushing your own opinion through while listening to others. But it's really taking a step back and having the guts to have some other people in your team take the decision and look whether this can be successful. So very trusting as well. And that's a little bit different than being the expert. It's not pushing through your opinion. I was asking one leader who had a low score on humility, and I was able to give feedback, and he scored high on all the rest of the agile leader competencies and behavior, just low on humility. And he said, well, I'm listening to others, but before I enter the meeting room, I've already set my mind up to what I want, and then I push this through. And this is exactly not the concept of humility that we are trying to see. And it's a lot to do with behavioral change to let others go first.
Okay, thanks, Nicole. What we're going to do now is break into smaller groups to discuss what this means for your organisation. And we've set a couple of questions just to help your discussion, which I will just share on the screen here. You may want to take a picture of this. I've also just posted these questions in the chat, so you've got them in your chat rooms. So perhaps thinking about how the model that we've discussed applies for your organisation. Are you reshaping your leadership capabilities? What are you learning about the capabilities that are required for success through this crisis? And then I'd also like to encourage you to spend some time thinking about leadership development. So how are you thinking differently about how to develop leaders? So we'll break into smaller discussion groups. We'll come back in a few minutes. And if you can be poised to perhaps share an insight or two in the chat as we come back into the plenary session, that would be great. So Athena, thanks for sorting us out into breakouts. Coming back, we've got a little poll. Just be really interested to hear what your conclusions are around what the impact of COVID is going to be on your organisation's leadership model. So if you can just take a second as you return to the main room to respond to that, that'd be great. For those who missed what I was saying just now, we've got a little poll that if you can take a moment just to fill in as you're returning to our plenary session. Thank you. Nick Twyman, you have the unfortunate position of being right next to me on the chat, so I'm going to pick on you. That's all right. Just be interested to hear, would you share just a couple of thoughts on the discussion you had, and also on the second question, in your work, are you seeing any different approaches to leadership development emerging as we continue through the COVID situation?
Sure. So in our group, we talked, speaking for James and where's she gone, Victoria? We covered quite a bit on, the composition of teams are changing quite a lot, bringing new faces together. We talked a bit about situational responses. Some situations and cultures and environments have been less affected, and so some of the more traditional approaches to leadership may still be valid. The key for people to be comfortable with networking and finding the resources they need in a more virtual environment. I spoke to the challenge I've had personally of having to adapt to all these new tools. Being a grey-haired old man, becoming digitally savvy has become a really important component of being able to do the work that we do. We also talked a bit about not only team composition, but the sort of speed of decision making, the need to kind of be okay with getting it wrong and adapting as you go. And we had a little chat about humility, and I offered a different bit of language maybe, which is about vulnerability, because I think You know, leaders have in the past been paid to know and have the answers and give direction, and we're now asking them to admit when they don't know, and that it's okay not to know, and then be willing to experiment and fail fast. So those all came out of our conversation. And I think so. Your second question, Gillian, the team piece seems to be massively important. I think particularly as people are coming back, even if it's still in a virtual world, because there are new teams, new compositions, new challenges. You know, there's big implications for recontracting as a team with the what, the how, the who, and the why, and accelerating our ability to get aligned quickly, adapt to new ways of communicating, collaborating, and staying up to date. Significant. And the other big emerging gap we're seeing is around back to the hyper awareness in Nicole's model. How to gather real-time information about what's going on and what's changing, particularly in terms of client behavior patterns or consumer behavior patterns if you're in the consumer world, and how quickly they're changing and what the implications are for the business. And the other is working cross-functionally. Most of the challenges now need immediate enterprise-wide cross-functional work, and that means bringing people together who may not have connected together as regularly as they now need to. So again, it's that networking, relationship building, building trust quickly seem to be the challenges.
Thanks, Nick. Interesting. If you've got a moment just to have a look at the chat, there are some feedback from some of the other groups, and it's interesting that there seems to be a theme in terms of, you know, we've had to demonstrate adaptability. We've been thrown into this situation, so we've learned on the hoof, and you know, that's hopefully something that we can build on into the future. So we're out of time. We're at the top of the hour. I'd just like to thank everybody for your participation today. Hope you've found the session useful and enjoyable. And my particular thanks to Nicole and to Anna for taking the time out to share with us today. As I said, we will be sending around a video of the conversation and some notes. So, and look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you very much.